All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Law Review, though today's show is going to be very, very different. There hasn't been that many cases going on in the crypto space this past week or two, though we will get you some views on a few of them. But a more important topic, we started discussing it on this show, and it's time to dive further into it. We want to talk about civil liberties. I'm sure the lawyers deal with this firsthand, but we all do as well. And also with all the events over the last few months between COVID and now the George Floyd protests and other frustrations in general. So it's time for us to dive into some of these topics. And what better panelists to bring on than three additional middle-aged, financially secure white men. So this is the perfect segue into this discussion. I did my best, guys. I really did. I did my best to create a diverse panel, and this is what we got. So we're gonna work with what we have, and I will try harder again next week. I'm not yet in a position to force people to come onto my show. Maybe one day when I'm the dictator of YouTube, we can pull that off. All right, welcome back, guys. Everyone's been on the show before. Not much of introductions are needed, but let's just once again go around the room. Did my mic just...
Tone, you muted yourself.
In pure, self-effacing white guy fashion, Tone decided to mute himself from the conversation in order to not offend anybody. Well done.
I don't know if my audio is or isn't working. Something
it's better.
Just better. Okay, it's still showing me problems. Anyway, let's just go around the room, around Zoom real quick. But more importantly, if you're willing to disclose where you're located, tell us how the situation is around you over the last week or two since our last show. Bill, let's start with you.
Bill Restis, Restis Law Firm here in Southern California in San Diego. In the crypto space, I'm on the lead counsel team for several ICO cases. And, you know, it's funny, today we're going to be talking about civil liberties. I feel like you have to tiptoe around these issues right now. So I'm a little concerned about the eggshells that are around and the minefields that are around for everybody. But we're going to try to discuss this as candidly and intellectually honestly as we can. Here in San Diego, Southern California, at least with respect to COVID, has opened up a lot. It feels mostly normal. In that sense, we've had protests, which I support. I'm very glad that people have been peaceful. My office is right downtown San Diego. I haven't been able to come in because some of the protests have been pretty robust here in the past couple of days. But generally speaking, I think there's a lot of really good feedback from the protesters in the community about, legitimate grievances that need to be addressed and discussed as a society. So I'll shut up. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say is for Bitcoin, for the topic of civil liberties, it's really apropos to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is all about freedom. And from my perspective, the Bitcoin is one of the most important developments in the 20th century for freedom, because it radically changes how money is created and distributed. And if there's anything out there in the world right now that might make us more free, it's Bitcoin. And so I think that's really how it ties into all of these topics.
All right, David, why don't you go next since you're already unmuted?
David Silver Miller. I used to be the lawyer who did all the lawsuits in crypto. Now everybody does lawsuits in crypto. So I got nothing special. Actually, I did file a new case yesterday that has not gotten much press attention because I haven't leaked it yet. But I promise you by the end of this week, there's going to be a new interesting case in crypto that's going to talk about recovery. Because I think a lot of my lawsuits, I've now moved from suing the entities who did initial wrongdoing to a lot of lawsuits you're going to see in the next couple of months from me are tracking down crypto assets all over the world, trying to collect the stolen crypto. Got a lot of, it's going to be kind of interesting, but the first lawsuit was filed this week.
Are you going to go after the promoters that got paid to promote?
This is a little different. So in this particular instance, my client lost $5 million in Bitcoin. I hired a Kroll Investigations worldwide, is now doing my crypto analysis with Coin Firm, and we're tracking the crypto, and we have a good idea where it is and at different accounts. So we're suing exchanges who know the KYC of who laundered the money. And if you don't know the KYC of your accounts, when you're in jurisdictions like the US, the UK, or in one particular case in Japan, we're suing you because now you've laundered the money and you've participated. And this is a new way for people who have lost millions of dollars in assets to recover their assets. It's not cheap, so we're starting with larger numbers, but it's going to get some interesting press later this week. I just haven't released it yet because I live in Parkland, Florida. I basically live near the Everglades and the boonies, so I haven't seen much of the world. And you know, because we're 4 average white guys, there are 240 people on the watching us right now. If 50 of you people like me on Twitter and jump me to 5,800 people on Twitter, I will donate $250 to wherever the comments say the best cause for helping out what's going on in the world right now. I'll donate $250 to whatever the comments tell me that's a legitimate charitable organization representing diversification. I'm happy to do that donation if you guys like me on Twitter.
I thought you were going to say that you were going to give away some free XRP.
David's Twitter is in the video description, guys. You don't have to go out searching far, so just pull up the video description, and his Twitter handle is in there. All right, thanks for that update, David. And Jason, how are things out in the Lone Star State?
Well, things are good here in Texas. You know, one of the things that I discovered in moving to Texas was something that I didn't expect. I lived in Oregon. My bar license is in Oregon. Went to school in Oregon, raised in Oregon. I'm an Oregonian. And when I moved to Texas, one of the things that I found out, which surprised me, was that Texans are incredibly more open and tolerant of open conversation about what's going on in the world than any other place that I've been, unlike the cancel culture that exists in Oregon or California or other places that I've lived. In Texas, there are people here that are more willing to discuss people's ideas, more willing to accept that there can be differing views than any other place that I've lived. It's one of the few spots where I've been where I feel like I can walk down the road and not be worried about what anybody says, regardless of your background, regardless of your culture. And that's one of the things that shocked me about living in Houston. From the protests recently, as only they can do in the Lone Star State, I want to give a big shout out to the group of horse riders that walked through Houston on horseback, supporting the protests. Every single horseback rider was of African-American descent, raising their hands in pride and support peacefully of the protests. And I want to say that any time that you can stand in solidarity with an effort peacefully showing your support, I think that just speaks to the volume of your character. I think when you cross the line and you decide that you want to take up arms against your neighbors, against merchants, against people in your own city who haven't done anything, but you think that that's the right time or need to lash out, I think that destruction is pointed at the wrong place. And I would just urge anybody that feels like violence is the answer to reconsider. And if you are going to do harm, don't do harm against your neighbor. Don't do harm against your brother. rethink your message and consider that your message is being lost the moment you turn to violence. With that, I just wish everybody to stay safe and stay strong in their beliefs, whatever they are. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no, thanks for that message. And I've been saying similar stuff on my channel in the morning when I'm doing the price show. I got stuck in those protests for a few hours. I was driving through areas I probably should not have been driving through. So I was there, and I didn't witness violence, and it was very, very unfortunate. We're probably going to dive into that topic a little bit more. Let's kick off with a couple of crypto things. Bill, you had some big news to share as well. Let's get that. I'll probably pull it up on screen share as well. Let's talk a little bit about crypto, and then we're gonna dive into it.
Sure. So again, I'm one of the I guess you can't call me lead counsel because the class hasn't been certified yet, but I'm plaintiff's counsel in the autonomy ICO class action that's pending in the Western District of Washington. This was, an ICO that was issued pursuant to a SAFT, and then they had a public sale. They had a pre-sale with a SAFT, and then a public sale. After the token was issued, it basically went to zero, and people had nearly 100% loss on their investments. We brought the case on behalf of SAFT holders, and then, a motion to dismiss and to compel arbitration was denied. And yesterday, we got a really big ruling from the magistrate judge recommending.
Sorry, Bill. Since and I am clueless on this one as well. Can you just define what a magistrate judge is? Because if I don't, the majority of the viewers don't either.
Yeah, I was definitely going to explain that a little bit because it's interesting. So, but let me just explain what happened, then I'll kind of explain what that means. So yesterday, the magistrate judge in the case recommended that our motion for preliminary injunction be granted. And what we asked the court to do was to freeze the assets that were the proceeds of the ICO that were in the hands of Autonomy, its parent company, Sentry, and the money that had been dispersed to the officers and directors of the company. The court, the magistrate looked at our motion and said, you know what, we think that it's appropriate to freeze the assets of Autonomy and the parent company, but not the officers and directors, and to have the Autonomy and the parent company give an accounting of the ICO proceeds and tell the court and tell the plaintiffs what happened to the money that was invested in the ICO. We consider that a huge win because on a motion for preliminary injunction, what that does is it moves a decision on the merits of the case forward to the beginning of the case. So it's like a mini trial, and it's an evidentiary motion where the court has to decide that in order to grant your preliminary injunction, they have to find that they think you're going to win at trial, that you're going to win the case. So we think that that's a huge step, and the next step in the case is going to be class certification. I think it's very obvious. This is, having done class actions for over 15 years, that this is a case that will be certified. But to answer your question, Tone, a magistrate judge is a federal district judge's deputy, okay? And what happens is the federal courts get really backlogged, and so the district judge, and it all depends on what court you're in, but some courts, judges are more reliant on magistrates than others. But basically what happens is you file a motion, you say, Judge, I want you to do something. And the judge says, I want my magistrate to take a look at this first. And then the magistrate basically writes something called a report and recommendation, which is an opinion. And then the parties have an opportunity to tell the judge why they think the magistrate was wrong. And then the judge looks at the magistrate's opinion, the parties, comments on the report, and then the judge can either adopt it, change it, deny it, or whatever the judge wants to do. I expect that Judge Jones in this case will affirm the magistrate because her decision and her reasoning was very cogent, and basically said, look, it thinks that the SAFT was an unregistered illegal securities offering, that the autonomy tokens were unregistered illegal securities, and that we're going to win on the at trial. So it's a really big win. It follows, on the Telegram case, the injunction that was issued in Telegram in the Southern District of New York, and that was even cited by the magistrate here. So it's no big surprise. I think that the law in this area is getting really nailed down, as we've talked about, ad nauseum on this program. But that's the big news there. But the big thing is that the court's freezing the assets and basically saying, you can't spend these anymore.
Bill, did you get the accounting already? Do you know how much you're going to freeze?
No, we don't know. So, I mean, we just got the R&R yesterday. We'll find out. I mean, I think that's a very interesting question, is how much is left.
So I'll translate for the people who are watching what Bill did, because Bill gave a very eloquent but very legal answer in simplified David Silver terms. Bill told the bad guys, you're not allowed to spend the money that you received through the SAP that you raised all this money in, and the court agreed with him. He said, even though you probably spent all of it on Lamborghinis, private planes, and marketing that went nowhere, right now
don't forget
dollars left.
Don't forget laptops and hookers.
I'm sorry, laptops, drugs, and hookers.
Yes.
Whatever money you have left, you must freeze. You're going to tell the court how much money it is, and it's a really big win for plaintiffs' lawyers when you get to freeze the money, because normally when people, and I'm not talking about any particular case right now or any particular bad guys, but normally when people steal your money, they view it as their money now. They don't view it as yours. So when you ask for your money back, they look at you and say, I'm not giving you money back. That's my money now. So it's a really cool thing what Bill accomplished, and it's really nice, and hopefully the judge adopts it. It's a great win.
I got questions.
Sure.
Generally, so my first question is, just like my question to David, it doesn't look like you are going after any promoters. I'm still waiting for the day when that happens. But let's go beyond that. Now, by telegraphing that you're going to freeze their assets, which you just said has not been done yet, and you don't even know how much, aren't you just encouraging them to spend more money right now on like hookers and blow and Lamborghinis and whatever?
Well, I don't know how to answer that question, other than to the extent that you have filed a motion requesting the assets be frozen. The magistrate says, I think the assets should be frozen. It is not gonna, if I was someone's counsel and that was the factual circumstances, I would say it's probably not a good idea for you to spend any remaining assets with knowledge that this is coming down the pipe. Now, one of the interesting things is we didn't file the case under the federal securities laws. We filed it under the Washington State Securities Act. And the way that statute is written, it allows for personal liability for anyone who was, and I don't know exactly the language, but a participant in the offer of sale and sale of the unregistered illegal securities. So what that means is we're going after the houses, the Lamborghinis, and all of the assets of the directors to the extent they, and officers to the extent they put it in their pockets and took it out of the company. And it doesn't have to be funds that are traceable to the ICO. They could have spent it all and have other assets, and we're allowed to get those. And we will be seeking those to the extent they've already spent everything.
All right, I got one more question, and then I do want to move on to the topic that everyone is waiting for, and I'm already getting chewed out in the live chat for it. So my last topic is, so here's what I've seen mostly so far. I've seen huge cases going after too big to fails, like EOS with a measly, like tiny 0.002% fine. We've seen the SEC go after the Telegram token, which never really like launched and never hit the markets, and no unregistered, like unregulated trading ever went on, and no one ever sold that token to anyone else. And then we've seen a lot of these cases, like you're bringing, or the BitConnect case, like after the thing already blows up and there's no more money and there's no more token that anyone cares about other than the people that invested and lost. I want to know, when is there going to be something material about these ICOs in the middle of the pack that are still kind of functioning? People didn't lose all of their money. They might even be up a little bit of money. I don't want to pick on this company, but I probably will, and I'm gonna make a topic for a future show. One of the companies that I support is Embly debit cards, and it's a Bitcoin debit card. You prepay with Bitcoin, you spend it anywhere that has a MasterCard logo. Well, that accepts MasterCard. But there are competing projects like 10X and Monaco Card. And the reason why I support Embly and not those is because I know they have a scammy utility token. So does an ICO. I'm not thinking.
Let's be honest, Tone. The reason you support them is that they are Bitcoin backed, not shitcoin backed. If we're honest, come on.
Well, no, but it's not that they're shitcoin backed. I mean, even Embly will take your Ethereum and load the card with it. Like I don't care if it's more of, did you create an ICO to give you an unfair competitive advantage by breaking security laws? And if the answer is yes, I will never support your company. But no one is going after them.
What it sounds to me like, Tone, is that you're a little worn out on the enforcement actions or legal actions that are taken in the too little too late category, and you'd rather see something come forward where there's still some hope, if there is some sort of fraud, where investors or people could be made whole because it hasn't all gone overseas or into hookers and blow, to relate it.
Well, that's
parlance of our times, right?
Well, Jason, that's one aspect of it, but the other aspect of it is that I don't to me, these companies have an unfair competitive advantage. Binance has an unfair competitive advantage over their competition that did not fund their company with an ICO.
Well, I'll jump in a little differently. One of the problems that I had in filing lawsuits that you're talking about, Tone, is that when I file a lawsuit against someone who I know is a fraudster, but who's still raising money and is well funded, up until the moment they actually publicly announce they're a fraud, by pretending to be a legitimate company, it's hard to accuse them of doing something that, even though we know they're a fraud. A lot of people in the community called out BitConnect before they were taken down by the regulators and the lawsuits.
Or OneCoin, for God's sakes. How did that go?
OneCoin, for God's sakes.
Oh, no. OneCoin's a special case. OneCoin never traded on these crypto exchanges. So
it was before its time. But I'll use what's the one, Cryptsy. The first time I sued Cryptsy, I had the lawyer and one of the main investors call me up and tell me what a good person Paul Vernon was, and how legitimate Cryptsy was. It wasn't until the class action that it was exposed as a complete fraud. I mean, it's hard, legally speaking, to get them without having actual proof and just basing it on allegations.
David, let's differentiate for a second. You and I have talked about this. I think the Cryptsy platform and the venue that Cryptsy provided was absolutely fantastic and valuable for the cryptocurrency space. How it was run by Big Vern and used for, I don't think anybody could say that him stealing the money that he stole was a good thing. But I do think having a platform where people could clone Bitcoin, toy with Bitcoin, examine improvements to Bitcoin, create a crucible for technological improvements, and have that be rewarded for their efforts in a free market environment. Cryptsy provided that. Big Vern running off with millions of dollars, that was shit. So I would love to see another type of venue like Cryptsy if it was run legitimately and didn't steal people's money.
Well, I agree with you, but I say this all the time. Think of the guy who gave Big Vern $300,000 as his first investor because he believed everything Big Vern was saying.
No,
That guy,
David, you and I both worked on aspects of Cripsy together, and you know that. You know where I stand against Big Vernon.
no, you're missing my point. You jumped in. I was going to go the complete opposite way.
Go ahead. All right.
The guy who gave him $300,000 in 2014 or 2013, he should be a billionaire right now. He totally understood where the world was moving. If he had invested his money into Coinbase instead of Cripsy, it'd be worth $1 billion today.
Sure.
Cripsy was ahead of its time, like absolutely. If it had been legitimately run, it would have been a phenomenal platform. I completely agree with that. So I feel bad for the guy who invested in Big Vern. He bet on the wrong horse. If he had bet on Brian Armstrong at the same time, he'd be worth $1 billion today.
For
My
me,
Alta
I
Vista
look at
stock is still
Right.
worth shit.
For me, I look at Cripsy in a different way. I look at all the technological innovators that try to shake up the blockchain world by producing and creating new ideas, and those are the ones that got screwed, not the guy that missed out on billions, but the couple of 18-year-old kids that tried to do something innovative and had it shut down because Cripsy failed. But both ends are correct. You're coming at it from the investor side. I'm coming at it from the technological innovator side. The same harm was there. If we're going to move into the civil liberties side, I have a very good friend of mine who I served in the Air Force with that asked me a question about the police officers that were standing by, that if not now, Tone, I'd like to introduce the question in a minute or two, or at least have it on the docket.
Yeah, no, well, let's lead in with that. I'll just throw my final to David. You brought up Cripsy, and you know what? If you asked me at the end of year one of Cripsy's existence, is Cripsy a scam? I would have said no. And if you asked me at the end of year one of Binance's existence, Tone, is Binance a scam? I would have said yes, because of the way Binance was funded through the BNB token. So I do want to separate the management of the company as to how the money for that company was raised.
Well, look, it's the oil barons and the people who made money during Prohibition. Back in the day, if you made enough money and created a big enough moat, you have a successful business out of something that started illegally. There's a lot of people who believe, I'm not saying I'm one of them, that Binance is going to evolve into a completely legal entity because they have so much money they're gonna be able to fend off everybody else.
Right, but why do they have so much money, right? This is the point that drives me nuts. Why do they have so much money? They've crushed their competition because they printed it and sold it to unqualified investors. All right, I'm gonna let this go. I'm gonna give it to Jason. Jason, introduce our civil liberties topic, and we'll save the security breaking of all the ICOs breaking security laws for another show.
So first of all, I want to start this by saying that I served in the U.S. military from 1991 to 1995, and I served with a lot of good people during that timeline. And between then and now, I've maintained relationships with a lot of the folks that I served with, and they've gone on to serve at JPL, Jet Propulsion's Labs. They've gone on to serve in many different aspects, and one of them, one of my best friends, went on to be a police officer in Arizona. And he and I, from time to time, have kept in contact. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to jeopardize his safety, but we have kept in contact over many things. And this is a question that came in not 20 minutes ago when he found out that I was going to be on the show, or didn't know I was going to be on the show, but happened to be that the question came in right before the show, and I told him to tune into the show to see what we would hash out. And I'm just going to read this word for word. It says, Jason, I love your insight on things, so I ask you again from a legal perspective, what do you think the odds are for getting convictions on the 3 other officers involved in the Minnesota thing? I think the primary guy is a no-brainer, but I was explaining to my son, charging the other 3 is not the difficult part, but actually getting convictions is an entirely different task. I also suspect the state will offer them sweet deals to be witnesses against the primary guy, which they'd be stupid not to take. I'd imagine there will be additional protests when all this shakes out because people don't understand the legal system. So the situation takes me back, And Tone, you may not have been here. Some of your viewers may not have been around to remember Rodney King and remember the riots that not only took place during the LA riots, but also after the acquittal of the officers after the riots that took place in the beating of Rodney King. And so the question here reminds me of, the end result of what happens in the trial with not only the man that had his knee on the neck, what happens, is he acquitted or not? What happens with society there? But what happens to the 3 officers that stood by as well? And one of the dangers here is that there is, I think, a perception from the masses, from the mob, that if this one guy or the 4 in total don't pay for the overall death in some form of death penalty function, that will continue to go throughout this civil unrest and civil burn. And the problem of mob mentality and mob rule has been around since before the justice system started, all the way long back before the law code of Hammurabi. And I don't want to get into the law code of Hammurabi, but I know my other learned attorneys on the panel will appreciate that. But where do we go from here? What happens with the guy that did it and the 3 guys that stood by? That's the leading question. I want to thank my friend, who I'll remain nameless, who I served with, not only for serving in the Air Force, but also to continue to.
Well, here's, I want to start with the whole concept of what we can say and what we can't say. Because when I was thinking about doing this show, I said to myself, you know what, no matter what position I take, whatever words come out of my mouth, I'm going to be offending roughly half of the people that watch this and think that I'm wrong on things. And I may be subjecting myself to, I don't know, any kind of the repercussions that come from modern cancel culture. And we've talked on this show. And so I was very reticent to even do it at all. I mean, when we were talking about this issue a few weeks ago in the context of the COVID lockdowns and the civil liberty issues and the constitutionality of all that, that's one thing. But we've gotten into this, now we're talking about an incredibly heated issue in America. And so for me, what's so concerning is that we've devolved into this country where you're either on the red team or the blue team. And if you don't conform your statements and your thoughts behind the statements to one of these boxes, then you're really subjecting yourself to cancel culture. And and if you do go into one of those boxes, then half of the people in America will really hate you, and so there's downsides to that. So for me, I'm really concerned about the inability of Americans in general to be able to hold 2 competing ideas in their head at the same time, and to have nuance, and to be able to speak nuance, and to say, I don't completely agree with that, and I don't completely agree with this. So for example, when we had COVID, I think that it was prudent to to have these lockdowns from a medical perspective, but it was also prudent to be concerned about civil liberties. So people on both sides had points. And now I think we have real issues with government-sponsored violence and police violence and racially motivated issues that are extremely legitimate. But at the same time, we don't need to burn down America to address those issues. And what I want to see is people having the ability to address nuance without automatically calling people who disagree with them a Nazi or whatever it is, because that's the only way we're going to survive as a civilized society. And let's handle these issues in the courts and not in the streets, because that's what a civilized society does.
I mean, I can throw my 2 cents in there, but David, let me just give the floor to you. Maybe you can address Jason's question. There's a thunderstorm coming through. He lost his power. Hopefully he'll be back soon.
I'm not gonna lie, I got distracted. What was Jason's? What was the question?
What would happen? Obviously, well, initially, the police department was actually protecting the officer. Here's the thing. Like, I don't even know what to call it. Do we refer to it as murdering George Floyd? Like, again, I want to be politically correct here, and some people.
It was murder. I mean, if he's convicted, it was murder.
If he's convicted, right? But that's the thing. He's not convicted. From what I've read, he was using a tactic that is allowed by that police department. Murder. I mean, like, isn't that like more like a manslaughter charge? He didn't mean to kill him. So again, like my understanding of the law, it's a little nuanced. I don't want to call it what it's not, and I don't want to spread panic. But in any case, the death of George Floyd due to that one officer. What do you think happens or should happen to the 3 officers that were there watching? And I'm not going to say they were cheering him on, but they weren't actually, they didn't do anything to stop it either. So what happens to them?
So I'll jump in with, I want to limit this mostly to legal thought per se.
Yes.
There was a big news today that he was originally charged with murder 3, and now they've upped it to murder 2. And the big difference in those things is how long you could stay in jail. If you get convicted on murder 2, you're in jail for at least 40 years. And the argument here is about whether it was premeditated and whether or not he intended to do this is the distinction really in how long he's going to spend in jail. Because you watch that video and obviously, I think people had different reactions to the video, and those who wanted to be on the police officer's side when they first watched that video were like, okay, he did that for a little bit, and they were defending what was going on. But I think what came out in the first arrest affidavit was that he had his knee on his neck and his back for 9 minutes, and for 2 of those 9 minutes, the guy was unconscious. And you just can't, it's hard to make the argument that, and people who were even on the more conservative side of this, legally speaking, that there was a distinction of utilizing excessive force when you feel your own life is in danger. First, I mean, if the guy was really passed out for 2 minutes of 9 minutes, then, even the most conservative person can see, legally speaking, a distinction versus someone who aggressively was resisting arrest from a police officer, and a police officer using force in 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But once a person's subdued for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 9 minutes, that's a really long time. And I think what Minnesota and what the state is going to charge him with and the police officers with is a long time coming. I mean, the problem is, and I think Jason brought up the LA riots with Rodney King when he was talking, this isn't over yet. I mean, a lot of this is when that police, I don't think there's anyone who reasonably believes that when that police officer woke up that morning, he thought he was going to go out and kill someone. So now we're into a legal argument of
I think that's probably right. I don't think anybody went out that day. I don't think the police officer went out that day. I don't think the 3 other officers went out that day and said, hey, let's go kill somebody. It's not premeditated. But to the extent that, as you were saying, David, that you had 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 9 minutes, where it shows that he's asking for some reasonable concession. He's asking to be able to breathe, etc. Then you get into reckless disregard, and that's a different kind of mens rea. There's a damn, I ran over you with the car, and then there's damn, I ran over you with a car, and I don't care. In fact, I saw you there. I didn't care if you got out of the way or not. I was just going to keep going. I made no attempt to stop. And in those cases, it does go up from a manslaughter or a murder 3 to a murder 2. What will be on trial here is the training and the acceptable standards of the police force. Now, I saw on the news that there are several police chiefs that have said that this form of restraint, this form of physical force is not trained in their jurisdictions, that this was outside of the bounds. I don't know if that's the case or not. I haven't reviewed Minnesota's acceptable use of force policies to be able to determine whether or not they were trained by the Minnesota Department of Public Safety and in their police academies, is whether or not putting your knee in the back of somebody's throat is an acceptable use of force.
I want to be clear, I'm not laughing at what Jason's saying. I am laughing at the comments for the people who appreciate that Jason cut me off. Thank you. I was mid-sentence.
Well, but and to go a little
Yeah.
bit into what Tone was saying, you know, the difference between murder and manslaughter is a question of intent. It's your state of mind, right? Now, we're all civil attorneys. We deal with securities. We deal with corporate and financial fraud. So this isn't 100% our bailiwick. I really wish Preston Byrne was on here. He seems to really, I know.
Getting him in.
But that's, you know, going back to what we learned in law school and never having practiced criminal law, because I think that's really about the best you're going to get from us on this area, is it's all about what your state of mind was. And when David was talking about those issues and saying, you know, 1 minute goes past, 2 minutes goes past, it makes it difficult to conclude that a person didn't have the required state of mind to take it from an accident to something that was intentional.
Well,
and then when it's intentional, it's murder, as far as I understand.
One of the things that I want to point out, and this is an interesting standard of care, and we can all thank Dr. Ireland for chiming in. If you heard the beeps there, that was Rihanna. David, she says hi, hope you're well. Tone, she doesn't care about you. Bill, I don't think you've ever met. But anyway, one of the things that she said was the moment that she's restrained somebody as a doctor, whether it be physically or chemically, she has a standard of care now that she has restrained that person to see to their well-being. And one of the things that's striking to me is that should that same standard be applied to this officer, the alleged perpetrator is in restraints, on his back or on his stomach, unable to fend for himself or care for himself. That person's life is in that officer's hand, and they have a fiduciary duty to that prisoner or that detainee. And I think that's an interesting topic. Tone, what do you think? If you were detained by a police officer and shoved down on the ground and couldn't fend for yourself, would you expect that at least somebody or the person that detained you would at least be held responsible or have some form of culpability over your well-being, seeing as how they've restricted your free movement?
Yeah,
I know that sounds stupid.
No,
this is what's happening.
Absolutely, but more importantly, the other officers, like you said, I mean, they need to intervene here. I mean, there are 3 additional officers there. So the more I think about it, now that you've raised the topic, the more I think those officers need to be, you know, punished in some way. Maybe not prison time, but I don't know. I guess it's up to the jury to decide. But I think they have even a bigger responsibility on this one, making sure that the person being restrained doesn't die.
Well, right now we have a system of laws, and again, I don't know this in a tremendous amount of detail, but police officers are generally protected. Okay, under it's codified in almost every state that it makes it very difficult to sue them or to have criminal prosecutions
It's
against
called qualified immunity.
It's
right?
called qualified immunity. right?
Yeah.
So initially that starts from a constitutional basis that you know, the old adage is you can't sue the king in the king's courts, and the police are the agents of the king, right? So you can't sue an officer of the state unless the state gives you the permission to do that.
So long as the officers are carrying out.
We lost Jason,
Oh,
but
we
I'm
lost Jason.
Well, it's different in every state, right? So every state is going to have some statutes that's going to say this is the line that police can go up to and that they can't cross.
I think where Jason was going is as long as the officers are fulfilling the duty of the state. Like if some cop gets drunk and shoots someone, he's not offered that protection.
It might be, it might not be. Again, I don't know the details of it, but there's policy reasons that courts have said they have this, and this is me just trying to remember back to, you know, my criminal law classes, is that you know, if a police officer is in a dangerous situation, they need to be able to act quickly. They need to be able to think quickly and execute without being afraid that they're going to go to prison or because they made a mistake, right? I think what all of this is demonstrating, from the Rodney King to the George Floyd, what I think is probably going to end up being a murder conviction, is that qualified immunity needs to be addressed. You know, that cops need to have some sort of a higher standard of care than they have now, so that they can think twice before, you know, they subject citizens to the type of treatment that we all witnessed in those videos.
You know, at the end of the day.
Oh, hey guys, I'm getting news in the live chat that the other officers got charged today.
Yeah, they got charged with aiding and abetting murder too. So
Wow.
so everyone's been charged today. I thought that was part of what we discussed at the opening. Yeah.
So
They've all been charged because, and you know something, this is one where and it's good that this video of this exists and that there's all 9 minutes of this video, because this would have been one that, like a lot of others in the past, would have been swept under the rug, and there would have been assumptions made that the video itself destroys. And it's good that the video is there. It's good for accountability. And look, I think at the end of the day, you've already heard the lawyer for Floyd. He's talking about the police officer. Supposedly he had 18 other accusations of excessive force, mostly against minorities. You're going to hear the two different sides of this argument start arguing about Floyd's history versus the cop's history. What happened, whether or not it matters that Floyd had been convicted of armed robbery or some other type of.
Right. He did time in prison. George Floyd wasn't exactly a saint.
But he's a guy who walked in. I think he was doing check fraud that morning. I think he was turned in like a fake check.
Yeah, I thought it was like fake money. I'm not sure if it was a fake check. Again, I gotta brush up on it.
He's trying to pass off like $50 and he ends up dead. I mean, that's just not an acceptable, and look, I get it. I mean, it's not acceptable and something's going to change, but now it's become politicized. Now you have everyone saying, people should do this, people should do that. There are obviously no easy answers, but legally speaking, and since it's a legal show, I think we should stick with the legality of it.
Yes.
There's going to have to be made a distinction as to whether or not the police officers should have stopped and they are responsible for the result of their actions. And I think at the end of the day, in this particular case, because of the video, they're going to be convicted. And that's the right result. And at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in getting the right results. And the right result here is a conviction for everyone involved. And that being said, I'm as bad as everybody else. We were all jumping the gun. There's video of him, whether or not he was still, at what point I'm sure people are going to say he didn't pass out when they say he passed out. Is there a video of him getting into the ambulance? Is he still, there's going to be a lot of different things here. But in the law, there's something called the broken eggshell. Even if there were a variety of reasons that contributed to Floyd's death, the cause of his death was that officer's knee in the back of his head and his neck, and you take someone as you get them. And if that's what it comes down to, then at the end of the day, let justice be served.
Hey guys, so I know Jason's back, but I'm curious, what is the penalty for aiding and abetting murder 2 as opposed to the murder 2, I guess, convicted felon, I guess. I'm trying to use the right legal terms here.
So,
you muted yourself, Jason. There you go.
My friend from the Air Force and current police officer in Arizona, who's watching the show right now, saw some of the comments and is enjoying the show, and I'm glad he's tuned in. But one of the things that he talked about, or that he just sent me, based on duty to protect, and I'm going to have to show my age here, and this is a little embarrassing, but I'm going to do it. He says that police are trained that once a suspect or somebody in handcuffs are apprehended, that police are responsible for them. They're trained on positional asphyxia, as most officers are, I would assume. And in this scenario, Mr. Floyd should have been rolled to his side to open his airway. He was no longer presenting a danger to the officers, and someone of those four should have intervened. He says, we are taught that as well, because guys can get locked in tunnel vision. And if we see that, we have to tap him out and say, bro, I got this, take a step back. Basically meaning that the three other officers that were watching should have recognized that the arresting officer was in a tunnel vision state in the moment, not necessarily realizing what was going on. And as an observing officer should have realized that the person in custody was in danger and stepped in and said, look, I got this, and rolled the guy to the side. So this police officer in Arizona suggests that the training, or the standardized training that exists out there, is that the three other officers knew or should have known to step in and recognize the situation, and they failed to do so. And that's pretty telling. So, sorry, Tone, go ahead. And with that information in mind, I
was gonna say, if you guys were, I mean, like, I have no idea, aiding and abetting, like, how murder 2, how much of a lesser charge, or is it identical to murder 2? Like, are you as responsible as the person that murdered the other person, or is it like usually, you get half the sentence, a quarter of the sentence? Like, how bad is that charge in relation to the actual charge? If you guys have any, I mean, like, I think you guys have a better view of this than I do, because I have no clue at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small clue, but generally what the law tries to do is it tries to proportion responsibility and punishment to fault. So in a situation like this, there is arguably, and I don't know what the criminal statutes say, again, there's a big asterisk there, but it would seem that the bystanders were not the actual person with their foot on somebody's neck, or their knee on somebody's neck. So whether the statute that says you're an accessory carries a lesser charge, or whether at the time of sentencing, the sentencing would be apportioned, but I would suspect that it would be a lesser charge. But again, this is going to be different in every state, and usually these criminal matters are determined by some statute. So they're going to be different everywhere.
Let me jump in here. This has been brought up not only in your troll box, Tone, but also in various conversations that I've had with other folks around the country. The thing that is striking here is the lack of patience for justice. Yes, Floyd died. We can't bring him back. The officer that was involved was immediately fired, arrested, and charged. and yet there's riots and burning.
Well, I think we've got a larger issue. So I think what
larger issue is there though, right? I mean, unless this is some form of overall or overarching massive political outcry, other than the pent-up energy of being locked in our homes for COVID-19 for months.
I was going to transition.
Certainly contributor.
I was going to transition into that with a few conspiracy theories thrown in, but go on. We'll get there.
So the question that I ask is, how long does it take for justice to be served? And Roberts in the troll box says, what's good enough? Should there have just been a public hanging immediately of the officer in the square in order to quell the crowd? Well, that's mob rule, and that's lynch mobs, and we did away with that a long time ago. And there's a fine balance here between justice and justice being done and the law getting it done right versus the public and the masses who are governed at the will of the people being governed that get to dictate how and when they are governed. And if this is a transition by the masses saying the government should hang whoever we say is going to be hanged unless we're going to burn everything to the ground, I may join in with Bitcoin Khaleesi and moving to the Caribbean, because this is not a society I want to live in where we have such short tempers. But at the same time, there also needs to be some form of message that's sent that it's not okay to kill people.
Well, I think that's exactly,
there's a balance.
There is a balance, but the larger issue here is, and I think Tone's screen sharing here kind of raises one of the issues, is that we have a system that allows police officers to act with impunity. You talked about Rodney King. We have dozens of examples, highly publicized examples of police officers going off the rails. And I think that there's no incentive for them, there's no deterrent for them to not act the way this particular police officer did with George Floyd. And, there's issues with systemic racism that none of us on this show are qualified to discuss. I think,
hold on a second. We may not be qualified because we're old white men, but it doesn't mean that from a legal perspective, academic and scholarly perspective, that we can't have an intelligent academic conversation about all the issues that are involved.
For sure, but what I'm saying is,
and going back to the beginning, I for one am not going to allow myself to be canceled because I have an observation about the issues. Right?
No, and that's certainly not what I'm saying. I'm totally against cancel culture. What I was saying here is there seems to be an issue with police, and it's not just with this issue with qualified immunity. And I'm not trying to shit on any police officer. It's a job that I really, they're put in positions that I really can't imagine. But at the same time, in this country, we've had for a decade or more a very troubling militarization of police in this country.
I witnessed it. I saw it.
Right, you've seen it. You've got people, SWAT teams busting into people's houses in the middle of the night and shooting up dogs and grandmas with with no drugs, no guns. They're completely unarmed. We've got dozens of these. And so I think what we have here with George Floyd is a situation where people had a particularly egregious instance, a particularly egregious tragedy, and we've been seeing these instances over and over again for at least a decade. And if you want to talk to African Americans, it goes back through the entire history of the United States. And again, I'm a white guy in Southern California. I have a great life. I don't see these issues on a daily basis. Southern California is a very tolerant place. I tend to be one of those people that say, well, what racism? Everybody's, but that's here in Southern California. It's different.
But
I think we got to a point. To a point, Jason, where everybody's been seeing these examples of, and I don't want, again, police misconduct, and people said enough is enough. So now you have protests. But the interesting thing for me is we have a moment where everybody in America agrees that this particular instance was an injustice, that this was criminal misconduct by the police. And so what I'd like to see is that while everyone is focused on this issue, that we can use this, just as Tone was showing, for an opportunity to address these issues of qualified immunity and make them more proportionate, and put a governor really on what police are able to do, because the vast majority of police, I think, are just trying to do their job. They're probably good people. I don't know many of them personally, right? But then, you know, there's a bell curve. There's a bell curve where there's idiots and assholes, and there's going to be these people that get in with a power trip, thinking that that's how you show that you're tough or powerful in the world, is you mistreat people. And we need to make sure that those bad examples, that the law can appropriately address those bad examples.
And I don't disagree on any particular point. Where I disagree with the whole process that's going on is a community going out and burning a neighborhood convenience store and protest is so disconnected with the injustice that it smacks of stupidity. It just, there is no connection. Portland, Oregon, my home, the people protested. They went out and protested and rioted against the Justice Center in Portland, where the police are. At least there's a connection there. There's a link, right? There's some sort of connection to the violence and the outspeak.
I couldn't agree more. And it's the same thing we saw in, I think, Michigan, when during COVID, people wanted to get their businesses open, go back to work, enough of this lockdown, and they went to the State House. Well,
Right.
like, at least it was in the right place of where you're supposed to have the protest.
What I don't understand is why people who are watching, whether they be in San Diego or they're in Chicago or they're in Portland or Houston or anywhere else, have to be afraid to go out to their local grocery store to try to get toilet paper and food for their kids. Why are they afraid to do that? Because they're worried that protesters or rioters may burn the fucking place down, and it's completely unrelated to anything that happened. And that's the disconnect that I have.
Well, this is
And
why
that's
I was
where
talking
think,
about.
Hold on,
Yeah.
William. That's where I think that the message, the good message that is available here about police brutality, the good message about police violence reform, all of that is being lost. And the message is being lost through untargeted and random violences on communities. And that hurts me, because there is a message to be heard here. And I wish it was focused to where some good could come out of it.
Well, and that's why I was
Thank
talking.
you.
That's why the first thing I said was, you know, we have an inability right now in this country, through the media and through social media, that people can't say, you know what, the protesters are right, but are also the people who are saying you shouldn't be burning down innocent store owners, and you shouldn't be destroying your communities, are also right. And it's like, for example, when I came into work this morning, you know, downtown San Diego, it's a beautiful, beautiful city. And when I came into work this morning, there was one of the buildings in my office, one of the stores in my office building, a little eyeglass shop that they had just opened. They were smashed, and people went in there and they stole sunglasses. And I think that you're exactly right, Jason, that we're at a point where everybody agrees that some reform needs to take place, and you're taking away from the power of that moment by putting attention on idiots and assholes who are smashing up local businesses, who are, you know, resorting to violence. Because if we look back through history, we can see that every, you know, great social change that happened, at least in the 20th century, from, you know, Rosa Parks to Mandela to Martin Luther King, What are some other examples that we have? They change their society by showing the moral failings of their oppressors.
Let's not forget Malcolm X.
Malcolm, well, right, but they showed the moral.
Took a different approach.
The reason they were able to have social changes because they were able to show the moral failings of those that were oppressing them. Gandhi, this is another perfect example. Gandhi, right, when the British were, just massacring these poor Indian people, the world saw that the British Empire was in the wrong.
Yeah.
And it brought this narrative that allowed for the social change. And I think that it's very sad that we're losing that, because people in this country, and rightly so, are saying, man, people are out there and they're beating people up and they're resorting to violence and they're burning things and they're, and that's just not the way to accomplish these political objectives.
Yeah, can I just jump in here? Hey, David, thank you for coming back. We know you're driving. We're not going to bother you too much, but feel free to jump in.
Yeah, that's a good angle.
Yeah.
That's better.
So again, we have people frustrated in the live chat about why there is, 4 middle-aged white guys talking about this. I'm sorry, guys. I tried getting more diversity on the show. I can't force them to come on the show.
We didn't want to be the only ones, trust us.
Right. We discussed this before we went live because we're all aware of the situation. But at the same time, I'm not going to bring random people on. This is a law show. If you're not a lawyer, unless you want to host instead of me, you're probably not going to be on the show. Just how the show works. So, hey, I want to connect the two things together because, look, I don't want to dive deep into conspiracy theories. I'm not, I try not to.
Tone, my aluminum foil's in the other room. Yeah. Do I need to go get my hat?
This one isn't that bad. Okay, so first of all, when I was driving through the protests, when the protests are going on, I mean, it's not that bad. So there's one thing we noticed. I wasn't in the car by myself, and standing there like 20 minutes watching thousands of people walk past the car. And we were trying to find people over the age of 30. And we were like maybe one or two. We say, yeah, you know what? That person is probably over the age of 30. Almost nobody. So it's a very young population, college age, probably some high school kids, young adults. Unemployment is very high. Obviously, with COVID, everyone is home. There's only so much Netflix you can watch. The murder of George Floyd, I want to try to use proper vocabulary before people cut it out and like make me look bad. So the murder happened at a very unfortunate time in people's lives with COVID. And here's the other thing. Like, again, I'm driving down the highway today and all I see on giant billboards, wear your mask at all times. The moment you're outside, wear your mask. So first of all, no one cares about COVID anymore, clearly, because of what's happening with the protests. And signs everywhere telling you to wear a mask in public or you could be in other legal trouble. And meanwhile, a month ago, they were telling us not to wear masks. And now they're all telling us to wear masks as these protests are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It was like an encouragement to protect your face as you're potentially rioting and breaking into stores, because that's what I witnessed after I got stuck in those protests for over an hour or so, whatever it was, and now it's really dark out. David, I think I gotta mute you for a second there.
Yeah, David needs to be muted.
And now it's like dark out, and then I continue driving, and of course there was a nice, very nice department store. It wasn't Gucci, it was something else that was fancy and expensive. That's broken into. Drive a little later, you see a car that was burned down the day before, and like people are posing, standing, like you can't stand on top of it because the roof has burned through. You're standing in the car, everyone's taking selfies. It's bad, and I think it's escalating worse. And I've been talking about how this will lead into civil unrest if people are not allowed to enjoy their Memorial Day barbecues with their friends and family. And what happened? And I said that back in April, back in early April. I said if people are not allowed to enjoy and forget about the coronavirus on their Memorial Day weekend, shit is going to hit the fan. And you can go back to those videos from April and early May when I was talking about this. And here we are.
Go ahead, William.
Thoughts?
I mean, it certainly contributes to it. I mean, we have a powder keg right now in this country. And I think, again, it's because people can't talk to each other. They can't have nuance in their conversation. If you get on Twitter, if you get on Facebook or any of these social media or the news, I can't even turn on the fucking news because it's just like, you know, people throwing grenades at each other. Whatever your tribe, you know, your political tribe is, it's the other political tribe's fault for every ill that you have in your life. And I really, and that makes me very sad, because I think that if we are willing to listen to each other, we'll see that there's a lot of valid points being made by people. And like I said before, it's people who said you shouldn't, we should have lockdowns in this country because we don't know, this could be a very dangerous virus, were right. And the people who said, well, but you really need to be careful that you don't infringe on people's civil liberties, were also right. And I don't know how we as a country can move forward unless we can get past this toxicity. But we have social media that has just dumbed down the narrative to a few short, 240 characters, and people just lob those like grenades at each other. And it breaks my heart. I mean, I think that this country, it's got a lot of problems, but if you really need to go around and travel if you think that the United States is one of the worst countries in the world. And I mean that with all sympathy to, all of the social issues and historical oppression that African Americans have faced in this country. But for example, I used to live in China about, I don't know, around 2001. I lived there for a year. And I wasn't allowed to talk. I had a girl, I taught an economics class at a university there, and I did some other things, but I had a girl in one of my classes stood up, in one of the first days, and she said, power to the people, something like that, people's revolution, or we need a new revolution. I never saw her again. After that class, she just was disappeared. I had on my birthday, this is a really crazy story. On my birthday, I had a man show up in a military uniform, show up on my front door with a birthday cake, just handed me a birthday cake. And I was convinced it was to let me know that they were watching me and that they were monitoring me. I knew for a fact that my apartment was tapped. All my mail going in and out was opened from my friends and family. And that's, so just the United
William,
States.
I have to add a little humor here. Are you sure it wasn't a stripper with a birthday cake? And you mistook him
No,
for
it
a
wasn't.
Chinese man. I mean,
Hey,
No, it
no,
wasn't.
What year was that?
This was around 2000, 2001. And
could have been a stripper.
it could have been a stripper. I mean, I was, what was I, like 2021 at the time? No, but anyway, it was serious. And so I've lived in a country where you don't have civil liberties. And we have a lot of civil liberties, and we have a lot of problems in this country that, we need to address. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't throw out the First Amendment that we're able to peaceably assemble. We can't throw out our ability to speak freely and not be persecuted for it. We can't throw out our ability to, have guns, which protects us from, a crazy totalitarian government. We can't throw out the Fourth Amendment, which protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures, or the Fifth Amendment that says that we don't have to incriminate ourselves. These are rights that almost no one else in the entire world has, and we need to protect them. And so we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater with all these, people that are out there seizing on this moment of anger, righteous anger at what happened to George Floyd, who want to burn the whole system down. Because if you think that it's going to be better on the other side, it's not.
So Bill and David, if we collectively go back to our second year of con law, one of the principles of the First Amendment, one of the principles of free speech, you may recall your professors talked about a fundamental principle being called the letting off of steam. That in a free society, an open society, and a society where speech is valued, to allow political speech to occur, nonviolent political speech to occur, it is the equivalent of letting off of steam. And to the extent that that speech is quashed or suppressed, the more violent the reaction the pressure creates when it finally releases. And I think what we're seeing here is that violent release of steam from effective groups, and it can be quantified, it can be measured, it can be analyzed, and rationalized. What I haven't seen happen since studying the civil rights movement from the 60s is that there's actually ever been anything done effectively to give a complete and total vent of that steam to where it doesn't continue to build up. Have you guys seen any type of standard pathway or vent for that steam that somehow got missed before these riots took off? Or is this just, is this another Ferguson? Is this another Rodney King LA riot? Is this another protest gone wrong and violent? When
Unmute yourself,
to
David. I know you have something.
I'll unmute you, David. Hey, before you guys answer, I would like to point out that over like earlier this week when I was doing these shows, and I also, mentioned how, look, I'm all for the protests, but it's the destruction of private property that's I find very problematic. And people did mention, oh, they're just letting off steam, so it's okay. Like I've seen that in my troll box in the comments section. And then I also saw comments that said, well, revolutions are not peaceful. Look at the, the American Revolution. It wasn't peaceful. And my comment was, I mean, I obviously wasn't there. That was almost 300 years ago or more. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm pretty sure the American Revolution was against the British, not against fellow Americans. So, like, you gotta, I'm not saying people should, go out and, start fights with police officers either. But destroying other people's private property is very unfortunate. But there's lots of conspiracy theories how that part of the protest is also being like driven by the powers that be and the politicians and malicious actors that are actually undercover officers starting, making these protests more violent than they are. Another conspiracy theory I'm throwing out there, lots of evidence for it. I haven't delved into it. All right, I'll let David.
Let's pick up on that last point for a second. A reporter reporting on a tornado or a hurricane is not going to go to a fully functioning supermarket. They're going to go to the trailer park that's been completely destroyed. So let's not forget the media's role in showing and fantasizing and exacerbating destruction to certain zones and reporting on destruction and saying that that's happening everywhere. I don't think it's happening everywhere, but I think it's being glorified by certain media outlets as an example of how unruly the crowds are during these times. Not that they shouldn't be unruly, not that there isn't justification to be, but the glorification and refueling the jet, so to speak, to continue to promote and glorify violence, I think, promoted by some media outlets is not a good thing. And there should be some accountability there as well.
All right, let's let David and Bill get in on this. I gotta go check on. I'm making bone broth. That's gonna take like 7 hours, so I wanna check on that. But I will hear you guys. My speaker is pretty loud.
Wait, hold on, Tone, David. What are your thoughts? By the way, I'm making bone broth.
I gotta walk away. I'll be back.
What the hell is that?
our next topic, I want to talk about, Trump calling in the National Guard and the curfews that were happening in New York and other places. So that's going to be our next topic. But comment on what Jason and I have been talking about for the last few minutes. I'll be back in a few minutes.
You got to unmute. Hold on.
You're muted,
Unmute.
David.
Unmute him.
David, you're muted.
Mute.
There
There
you
you
go.
go.
Okay. Driving, holding a phone, all these things. I'm probably committing like 18 different violations. But I personally believe that a lot of what we're seeing now is hypocrisy. It's the hypocrisy on both sides. It's the hypocrisy of we have all these stay-at-home orders and we're not allowed to go out and we're not allowed to do things. But all of a sudden, de Blasio, who was so, you can't do this, you can't do that, is now, well, protests need to happen. Everyone can go out. Everyone can congregate. It's the hypocrisy of the left and the right. I split both ways. I can care less. It's just everything so hypocritical. It's almost as I'm driving a car, watching the video in real time and participating in this has made us all so much goddamn dumber. It's ridiculous how dumb we've gotten, because at the end of the day, we're sitting here, and I truly believe this. If COVID came out in 1980, we would have been having COVID parties like they had chickenpox parties. It's because everyone's seeing so much of the extreme cases on Twitter, on 24-hour news channels, and that we're seeing the extremism of it, that we're now doing things differently than we know to be better or worse. And the truth is, no one actually knows. I was one of the proponents when we shut down. I had no problem with the shutdown because we didn't know. If this was like Ebola and it was going to be as deadly as people thought, then the shutdown was absolutely appropriate. But if we don't see a massive spike in COVID-19 in the next 2 weeks, because it takes about 2 weeks for the numbers to play out, with all these people around the world, I think someone was showing video from, I can't remember. I think it was video from Rome or Amsterdam today, where they were having a Floyd rally, and like it was completely packed for like half a mile. I mean, it's ludicrous that if people are going to go out and they're going to do these things and there's no spike in COVID, then it's ludicrous that I have to wear a mask in my office because to walk to go to the bathroom, and that we can't go back and open up society the way it's meant to be. So I'm not for or against a lot of things. I'm just against hypocrisy. And I think a lot of what we're seeing on all sides in the implementation of change is hypocritical from the left and the right. I mean, at the end of the day, the politicians have been there for 30 or 40 years. They've been in DC. There hasn't been change. I mean, if there was going to be change to the order of magnitude that they're talking about, it's not going to come from someone like Trump. It would have come from someone like Obama. It should come from who Biden selects as his running mate. Let him select a progressive African-American woman who is going to help fight the cause that he fought with Obama. Let it be Michelle Obama. Let her step up and be like this healer in chief. Let Trump, there's I forget his name. It's not Charlie Rose. What's the conservative young guy? Charlie Kirk, I think, maybe. He travels the country with an African-American woman, so he can say all the things he wants to say. But there's a lot of different things that are going on right now that are just hypocritical on both sides. And if we change the law to meet the hypocrisy, I think we're doing everyone a disservice. Now I'm going back on mute.
So much to unpack there, and I'm afraid to touch quite a bit of it. Bill, do you have any thoughts?
Well, there is hypocrisy. We've attempted to distill very complex issues into 30-second sound bites. Okay. We have a news system, whether it's Fox News or CNN or CNN, whatever the fuck call letters they have, that they don't give you facts and they don't try to give you independent information. They editorialize and they say, well, this person is bad. Can you see look, take a look at what this person said over here? And oh, can you believe that? They're so bad. And they're the problem. They're the reason why this country has all the problems that it has. We need nuance.
You're talking about the difference between objective versus subjective news.
Not so much. I mean, that I don't think
subjective news with opinion, that facts are presented subjectively according to a certain viewpoint versus objectively in just providing information and letting folks.
I think there's the weaponization of information, the weaponization of information on the news, the weaponization of information on social media. People's attention spans, like David said, are now down, and we've measured this, are really down to the limit of a goldfish. And this is the result of social media. We have a weaponization of information. Then we also have these really interesting aspects of living in a very free and open society where people can say what they purportedly can say what they want. And we're also, this is another interesting thing, we're also a superpower in the world, and other countries can't attack us with conventional weapons without getting blown to smithereens. So warfare in the 21st century is an informational warfare. And so, you know, we have situations where there's you don't know who on Twitter is a bot and not a bot, and where those messages are coming from, whether they're coming from Iran or China or Russia, or, you know, who knows where they're coming from.
Oh, whoa. If you piss off the XRP army, you know exactly how many bots there are.
Right, or the XRP army.
Oh, sorry about that.
So the point is, if you have garbage going in, you're going to have garbage going out. And I don't know how you fix this. You know, this is another civil liberties issue. This whole issue with Trump trying to have an executive order that curtails Section 230, which is the and I wish we had Preston on this, because I don't know enough to talk coherently about it. But we have an information problem, right? Everyone doesn't know what to believe and what to think, and what factual premises to base our reality upon and to base our analysis upon. And I don't know how you fix that. But one of the things I can tell you is it's not less speech. It's not cancel culture. It's definitely not that.
Can we talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room? Can we just finally do it? The release of U.S. military forces through the National Guard on U.S. soil in order to quell rioters that are deemed to be domestic terrorists, also known as Antifa. Can we talk about it, or at least say that we acknowledge it, but we're too fucking afraid to talk about it? Can we at least get there? Because we've
I would love to talk about it. You know, I was very concerned.
Let me jump on my soapbox, and I will gladly yield to you, Bill. I know you and I both are passionate about this.
All right, that's our next topic. Before you do that, I just want to comment on something David said, because we're going to walk away from this topic. David was talking about potential nominees, and I have said publicly on the show, I have no intention of voting for anyone that the Democrats are putting out, like Hillary or Biden. I think it's worse. But if one of them, let's say, going back to David's point, happened to choose Candace Owens as their running mate for vice president, I may change my mind. You know, like, so it really depends on who they're aligning with, Jay.
Excellent point for humor. Excellent time slot for humor. Well done. Yeah.
Right. So going back to so I am very clueless when it comes to Antifa. So as you lead this story in, can you just like I know almost nothing about Antifa, so please be very specific in your description of our next topic.
Bill, do you want to cover Antifa, or do you want me to?
Well, I'd like to know where you'd like to take this. I mean, I think there's an issue with the president using the military on U.S. soil. There is a law called Posse Comitatus, which says that no military, that we should not. Well, fuck, I don't know what the law says.
So first of all, let me say, as prior service Air Force, I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The very oath that every military person takes when they leave to go be indoctrinated and entered and sign the contract to serve the country says that they will defend both foreign and domestic. Now, to say that U.S. forces shall not be deployed on U.S. soil is bullshit. We've done that before. We'll do it many times throughout. Where I'm getting at, where this is really the nuance of it, the heart of the argument is whether or not Antifa should be declared a domestic terrorist group, and whether or not the President of the United States has the ability to make that declaration, or whether or not it needs some formal designation supported by a bicameral resolution with executive signature. I have no problem with US forces in the United States if there is a threat or some form of threat that's being deployed that can't be handled by our local police state. That's fine. I'm fine with that. It's the Antifa designation of a terrorist group that requires the deployment of those forces locally that I'm tweaking out about. What do you think, Bill?
In what way? Because, and again, this is an aspect of the law. Everybody likes to think lawyers know everything about the law. I wish I did, but it's so vast. It's like a bottomless ocean. So it's not something I know in great detail, but from a very high level perspective, it's my understanding that the terrorist designation is something that gets you outside of the constitutional process, okay? And that the constitutional protections don't apply to someone who is designated as a terrorist. And the only way you can get to designate someone as a terrorist is under the Patriot Act. And that sort of is supposed to apply outside of the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. And that's sort of how we got to places like Guantanamo, right? Which are in constitutional limbo. And our government has said that the rights to due process, to trial, don't apply. And I definitely, now whether I think Antifa is good or bad, and I'll tell you, I think that they're really bad, we can go into that, designating them as a terrorist organization to attempt to take them into the sort of military tribunal context, I think is very dangerous and should, assuming I'm right, again, I don't know if that's the right analysis, but if that is the way that the president is trying to take this situation, I think it's very disturbing.
So can you elaborate on Antifa's history a little bit and what have they done to potentially get this designation? Because if they are a group here, like born and raised like in America, that's a horrible slippery slope, because today it's Antifa and tomorrow it's, your neighborhood, meeting group. It gets very...
There's a difference between Antifa and your local neighborhood meeting group. Antifa historically has stated or demonstrated that they are willing to use violence in order to shut down political ideas or political movements that are not in line with their own. Some of that for the Bitcoin group that are watching may remember, and her name escapes me and I feel terrible about it, the girl that was wearing the Make Bitcoin Great Again hat.
Kira.
Yes, Kira, thank you.
Kira from Blockstream, yeah.
Yes, she was wearing a Make Bitcoin Great Again hat. It happened to be red and she got clocked in the side of the head for it during...
She got pepper sprayed.
Yes, pepper sprayed. Somebody else got clocked in the head for wearing that. But she was attacked physically by an Antifa group that felt justified in using violence as a form of speech to try to cancel out and suppress her views, which turns out weren't contrary to anybody else's views. She just happened to be wearing a red hat. So the Antifa or anti-fascist organization uses fascist type instrumentalities and methods in order to bring about their ends. They have brought about the ends of public debate and political speech through the use of force for over a decade. And it is increased and increased to where their organization now plans and facilitates violent demonstrations where normal peaceful demonstrators are. One thing that Rihanna pointed out is that in this unfortunate time, there's been a conflation of efforts. You have protesters, you have rioters, and you have looters. And those are three different segments of groups that are all trying to do three different things. And unfortunately, they've been lumped into one total group that takes away from the message. If the group of the rioters was to say, no, we don't want police force doing these things or those things, etc., they would denounce the looters and say, no, we're not here to loot. We're not here to rob grocery stores or shoe stores or to try to get color televisions or whatever the fuck is happening. We denounce that. We're a part of that group. They're on their own. Those are criminals. We are here to riot, to rise up against an oppressive government regime that is keeping our beliefs and oppressing the people. And the looters, I don't know how they have a leg to stand on saying that somehow stealing a color television has any fucking thing to do with a political statement. And maybe that's my white fucking privilege talking. I don't know. But somebody fucking mansplain it to me so I can understand how stealing from your neighbor down the street who didn't do anything to you has anything to do with protesting against police brutality. There is no connection between the two. So I would like to make sure when we're having the conversation about Antifa that it has nothing to do with the looters. Let's put the looters in their own fucktarded category and keep them there. But the rioters, to the extent that they are rioting against political objectives without harm of people, I'm fine with that. I will support that free speech. That's the letting off of steam. I may not agree with it.
You guys freeze on me now?
I may not want it. I may not hold with those values, but I will fight till the day I die to support the ability of somebody to go out into an environment and protest. But the second you cross the line into violence, whether that be physical or property violence, you lost my support. So, I don't know.
No, Jason, that was a very good, very much needed rant. But I want to go back to Antifa for a second because I am being educated on the show, and that's my favorite part of the show. So, what are their political goals? What like if they're attacking, someone for wearing a red hat, clearly they thought it was a Trump supporter and they're anti-Trump. So what is their political agenda? Do you guys know? Because like I said, I have not kept up with Antifa's politics.
Go ahead, Bill. I've monopolized. Go for it.
Well, listen, I don't, just like I think it's inappropriate to lump everyone who wears a MAGA hat into the Nazi category or the white supremacist category. I think it's probably inappropriate to say everyone who might go by the badge of Antifa has a particular political aim. I don't know what's in people's hearts and minds.
Bill,
okay, and that's one of the problems.
You lost me there.
I'm gonna get no. I mean, this is. I keep going back to this. There's nuance. People are individuals. We're complex systems. That's what we in our society are trying to do is to shave off all the edges of a human being and their experiences and say, oh, it's an Antifa or it's a MAGA supporter. Right. So there's definitely people in our society who, whether because they're oppressed by some sort of a racial inequality or whether they're oppressed by the oligarchy of our vast, unheard of wealth inequality that we have in the United States, they have legitimate grievances, okay? And how you express that on the political spectrum, I think, is very valid. And we need to try to understand where people are coming from so we can hear what those grievances are and we can understand where they're coming from. Having said that, one of the problems I have with, and again, I don't know the hearts and minds of people who might believe in a certain thing, but one of the problems I have with Antifa is it's sort of like this. If I say, well, Antifa obviously means anti-fascist, right? That's what their name is. But by having a name like that, you get to lump everybody who politically disagrees with you as a fascist. So if I call myself, if the three of us make ourselves the anti-bad guy group, then we can say, well, listen, we're just fighting the bad guys. Well, who are the bad guys? The people we disagree with. So it allows you to tar and feather someone who disagrees with you politically and say, well, how can you object to me fighting the bad guys? I'm anti-bad guy.
Well, again,
right? And I think that's a problem, right?
Bill, but this is my question, right? What is their political agenda? Like, what are they for? What are they trying to achieve other than violence?
Well, that I really don't know. So when I was sitting back and I was really listening to this, I was saying, I don't know what people are trying to achieve. But one thing that I know is at least one of the goals of some of the people in our country is a very far left radical desire for communism. And if you think communism is a great idea, you've missed out on history. You're historically illiterate. My wife, for example, was born in Cambodia just at the end of Pol Pot's regime. And Pol
Pot was a dick. I just want to go on record as saying Pol Pot was a dick.
He was a dick.
Yeah.
And for example, she was born in a refugee camp. Her dad had to smuggle her out he had to drug her as a baby to smuggle her out through the jungle so she wouldn't cry, because the people who were frankly not very educated thought that they were doing good things, and they thought that by killing people, all the bad people, that they were going to make a better world, and that resulted in a mountain of skulls. And that's what happened in China with the Great Leap Forward. If you don't know about that, that's what happened in the Soviet Union. If you don't know about that, and I know we're getting a lot of
Soviet Union wasn't as bad as China. And by the way, I was born in the Soviet Union.
But you probably also have some stories.
Yeah, well, not from those times. Like all, like the big Soviet Union, like atrocities, they took place like 50s. Like they were way earlier. Like the 80s, 70s, 80s in the Soviet Union wasn't as bad as other countries, especially in Asia, under communist rule. I'm not saying it was great. I'm just saying I will say that like Asia was worse during those years.
Asia was worse. So I understand, the desire to make a better world. But if you go down that path, there's hundreds of millions of skulls, piles and piles of dead people. And it was one of history's greatest tragedies. And it's unfortunate that the specter of communism is not dead. I mean, I love China. I love the Chinese people. I love the Chinese culture. But their government, they're fucking thugs, man. And they're the worst. They're the worst of the worst. And it's because they have an authoritarian communist government. And I don't want that here. I don't want my wife. Like I said, my wife is pregnant. I'm going to have a kid in a few months. I don't want my kid growing up in a world that doesn't have civil liberties, that doesn't have the Constitution. And this is from a sincere desire to have a better world in the future. So I think we need to listen to everybody's grievances, but we need to talk to each other and not punch a Nazi, right? Because it's not going to make a better world.
No, it for me, I think it's okay to punch a Nazi. No, I'll punch a Nazi. Let me try to add just a touch of perspective. When Trump was elected, there were millions of people that sat back and said, how the hell could this have happened? And there's a comedian, you guys can look him up. His name is Jonathan Pye. It's a fake news reporter. He went on about a 10-minute rant of how that happened and why Trump was elected. And it was because the left had so viciously and continuously told the right or anybody else that you're allowed to have free speech so long as it's the same speech as us. And to me, that's fascism. When the only acceptable speech and the only acceptable ideas are those ideas that are accepted by those who are in the cultural correct, that's fascism. When you're not allowed to have a thought that's outside of the mainstream, that's fascism. When you're not allowed to believe what you want to believe, that's fascism. When all of those things that colonialists who were under British rule hundreds of years ago turned and looked at Britain and said, screw you, Britain. We don't want you ruling here, and created a constitution and a Bill of Rights. They were throwing off British fascism in order to develop a country here, I'm going to sound fucking corny, of the people, by the people, for the people, without exceptions. And somehow we've gone from there to today, where there are people that believe that only a certain point of view is correct. Even that Nazi that I would punch in the face, they're allowed to have their Nazi thoughts, so long as they don't infringe on me, my rights, or anybody else's rights. They can have their Nazi thoughts all they want. I don't care. Have you guys seen the Apple TV show Mythic Quest? Have you seen it? Yes?
I haven't, no.
All right, so go get Apple TV, watch Mythic Quest. They have an episode where Nazis, okay, so Mythic Quest is a game that's supposed to be like World of Warcraft, all right? And for you that are watching the Troll Box, I know some of you have seen it. They have an episode where Nazis invade World of Warcraft or Mythic Quest, and it's a great disaster. And they go through this dilemma on whether or not Nazis should be banned or not. And everybody agrees that Nazis are bad. But there's a free speech component of saying, well, wait a minute, if we ban Nazis from having Nazi thoughts, aren't we just as bad as Nazis altogether? And the end result is they end up giving the Nazis their own little realm, their own little server, their own little world where they can have their Nazi thoughts all they want without excluding them from being Nazis and without telling them they can't be Nazis and everything else. They just allow them to be Nazis in their own little Nazi world. In the United States or any other place, when you tell somebody you mustn't do this, or you mustn't say that, or you mustn't think this, you create an environment of strife. Wrong or right? Free speech is free speech for everyone. Free association is free association for everyone. The line gets drawn at violence. The Supreme Court is clear about that. People talk about hate speech. There's no fucking thing such as hate speech. It doesn't exist, period. It doesn't exist. It doesn't. There is free speech and there is speech that will incite violence, which is outside of free speech. There is no gray area. Look it up in the Supreme Court. I'm not going to provide you links or anything else. You want to go out and spew hatred and spew horse shit on the corner, go do it. God bless. I'm not going to be there cheering you on. When the media supports it, they add fuel to the fire. I don't care. The biggest thing the media could do is just not give them an audience if you don't agree with it. However, when you tell somebody you can't say that, when you can't do something, that just incites somebody to blow off their steam. The steam builds up and then it explodes. And here with these riots, people saying you can't do that, or you can't speak out against police, or police are always right, or obey a lawful order that everybody knows isn't lawful. When the system comes down and tells you you mustn't do that, even though everybody knows that it's wrong, all you're doing is waiting for an explosion. And then you get opportunists like Antifa or looters that come in and try to hijack the scenario. God, I've been talking for a long time. Anybody?
Well,
yeah,
I'm looking at
follow up, but I forgot already. Go on, Bill. I'll remember.
No, I mean, I'm looking at the clock. It's and I actually have some clients who need some
fine.
things, but there's a couple things that I do want to say, because, you know, this is Bitcoin Law Review. And I look out in the world because I'm just like, you know, I'm just like all people. I want a better life for myself, for my friends, my family, my kids, for everybody. I want this to be a better world. So how do we make a better world? Obviously, we have these things. We have these very pressing issues right now with the protests and with police brutality that need to be addressed. We definitely need reform. We need to address some very systemic issues, right? And now is a moment to do that. But as I look out in the world, to me, there is someone who's, you know, going back to college. I mean, I studied political theory and political science. I read, you know, the Federalist Papers about, you know, why our government is set up the way it is, and you know, what makes a free society. How do we make a society better? You know, more diverse. And when I look out on the world, I don't see a better mechanism for freedom than Bitcoin. Because if you look at the way the world is structured, it's the most basic unit of how we measure our lives and organize our lives is money. And if you can create a money that has freedom built into it as a mechanism that can't be censored, that can't be controlled, that can't be confiscated, I don't see a better mechanism for creating that free society that's currently available to us today. And I'd like to see what Tone, specifically, you're not a lawyer, but you know, I'm sure you know a lot about this, and Jason, your opinion on this too, because if you can give democratic free money, I think we can change a tremendous amount of what is wrong with the world and make it right. Get in there, Tom.
I'm not quite sure how.
I lost signal for a second. That's why. Go ahead, Jason.
I'm not quite sure how Bitcoin would keep a cop's knee out of the back of a guy's head. I'm not sure how Bitcoin would keep somebody from throwing a brick through a merchant's wall. Maybe I'm just struggling with the pain that that the country's going through, that my friends are going through, that my communities are going through, and I'm just not seeing a link in or a tie-in to cryptocurrency to solve social issues at that point. And that just may be me being at a point to where I'm mentally and emotionally exhausted on the topic, having, you know, I spent 5 days out in the ocean with pilot whales and fishing and seeing beautiful sunrises and sunsets in the Milky Way. And I came back to fucking riots and burning in the street. And maybe I'm just not able to make the connection. And for that, I apologize.
Well, yeah,
unless you can draw a link.
Let me make the connection, because obviously there's racism, right? So, you know, you're right. I don't know how money can address racism, but money can address economic inequality, right? Because let's just take an example, what has happened in the past few months with the COVID emergency and the injection of an incredible amount of what the bankers call liquidity into the financial system. So we had about $6 trillion of liquidity, that money that was created from the Treasury and from the Federal Reserve that was put into the economy. Well, where did it go? Now, most people got $1,200 from, if they got anything at all, $1,200 a person from the government. That amounted to a few $100 billion. And then the rest of those $1 trillion went to the absolute upper echelon of society. And so we have a monetary system that creates and concentrates wealth into an incredibly small group of people. And I think that it's designed that way, because if we look at the arc of history, we see that banks and central banks have been this engine for creating a new aristocracy, right? That we kind of got rid of the concept of the old European aristocracy, where you had lords and ladies and serfs, but we've substituted that for a new aristocracy, the monetary aristocracy, that has come about from the artifice of central banking and the privilege of being able to create money and get it first. If I get money first before it's printed, I can buy up assets that creates inflation in the value of those assets, and then I can sell them to some other poor asshole who didn't get the money first. And I get free money, and I also get capital appreciation, and then everybody else in society has to buy those assets from me that I got essentially for free. And if you
for a second, I thought you were talking about Ethereum. I lost my train.
No, if you can create truly free markets, I think that we can really unleash humanity's potential, and we can break this system of the new aristocracy that the banks have over all of us. And that's what I think the potential for Bitcoin has to make a better world, to make a freer world for everybody. And I want to see what Tone has to say, because he's been chatting in the troll box.
No. Because I'm frustrated with people in the troll box yelling at me to bring more diversity onto the show. You trust me, it's not for the lack of trying, and it's actually not easy. Look, I do my best, and I think anyone that knows me knows that. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about my past and where I grew up or how I've lived my life up to this point. But look, it's frustrating me, honestly, guys. When you accuse me of not trying to bring diversity on this YouTube channel. I do the best I can to do that, but I'm not going to sacrifice quality of content. So I do the best under the circumstances. Okay, let's get back to the topic at hand. And Bitcoin is the best silent protest you can make right now. And someone did point out in the chat, had everyone been using Bitcoin, this incident with George Floyd probably wouldn't have happened, because he wouldn't be able to, send you a fake check or a fake cash or a fake transaction. So Bitcoin is the best silent protest you can make, and I'm very confident that things will change in the next 10 to 20 years as Bitcoin continues to dominate basically the world of finance. Just as an aside there, Tom, when you're talking about Bitcoin being the solution for stability and in the world and everything else, I don't know how you can say that in light of our monumental drop down to 8,500 from 10,000 the other day, and say that there's stability in the Bitcoin market. Come on, what happened there? What happened? Was that you? Was that you and you calling a sequential point, and you told everybody to sell? What happened there? I blame you. Okay, so 8,500 is a little overranking it. It was more like 9,000 from 10,000. And also we had just gone up from that area to 10,000. So factoring in, so basically if you took a 2-day nap, nothing has changed for you. But keep in mind. Oh, wait a minute. Are you suggesting that if I take a 2-day nap, all of the riots and all of the protests will just go away? No, we're talking about Bitcoin price. Right? If you were if you were away from the Bitcoin price for 2 days, the price for you hasn't changed. Look, you can look at it that way, but I can look at it another way. Like, for example, maybe not your apartment, maybe outside of that guitar, or maybe your microphone, like nothing else in your background would have really changed in price that much. If you take an item under $500 and the price of Bitcoin drops from 10,000 to 9,000, the price of that $500 item is not going to fluctuate all that much or under. Your cup of coffee did not change in price with a drop in Bitcoin from 10,000 to 9,000. You know why? Because my cup of coffee costs US dollar fiat amount currency, not Bitcoin. Well,
right?
we're
So
nowhere.
if we're no, listen, if we're going to talk about how Bitcoin can save race relations in the world and it's going to solve all the problems, maybe it's
Well, I'm
time
not
for me
gonna
to
go. I'm
exit the
not gonna go.
conversation.
Okay, look, you got me there. I'm not gonna go that far, but look, it's a way to take some power from a state, and I'm a little happy. I'm happy about that.
Sure. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think Bitcoin will solve police violence? Bill, you?
No, but what it
No.
does, but
No,
there is
of course
no
not.
more fundamental organizing feature of society than money. It is so close to the base layer of how we organize ourselves that it almost makes the state unnecessary in a lot of respects. Not police, not the traditional police aspect of the state's function, but think about, there's a tremendous number of social ills that if you can fix money, I think you can fix them, and then you can fix wealth inequality. You can, and I'm getting tired of talking. My brain is really, and my ability to articulate cogent thoughts is really starting to go way downhill.
It's tough. I know we've gone a panoply of very emotional topics, and you can go from the conservative.
But I think we could have a whole show about that. Now, this is maybe not the right one because it's a law review show. Yeah. But there's tremendous arguments to be had, and if you want to talk about civil liberties, there's really great thinkers on this issue who have opined on Bitcoin's role in a people's movement of the liberation of society from the oligarchy that we have.
So if I can, let me set that up. If we talk about Bitcoin being the source of economic freedom for people in a future society which disenfranchises government because, as you said, a solid monetary system somehow replaces government, then that would mean that Bitcoin would then have to actually be not just, as Tone has advocated for, as a store of value, but it now would actually have to operate as a daily currency through mass adoption and use as a currency through spendable environments, through merchant services, of which we know today it's not capable of doing based on block times, et cetera, unless you bring in Lightning Network and everything else. So if we're going to have a Bitcoin show about Bitcoin changing the world, we're going to have to also bring in people, not me and not Bill, but also people that are technological experts that can actually speak to the adaptability of Bitcoin to be able to do those things, not just real life stuff.
Yeah,
right?
we can do that. And I'm planning to launch another show called Understanding Bitcoin, where I plan to talk about these things with the qualified people. Now, Jason, I agree with the first half of what you said, that Bitcoin will need to be a transactional currency in order to achieve that. I do agree with that.
If it is going to achieve that. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. But I thought you were now at the moment, I think that people's willingness to adopt it as a day-to-day currency is slightly ahead on the problem scale as the technological barrier for them to do so, because Lightning is functioning, though not as great as it will be in a year or two. Everything will come in time. However, to your other point from earlier, we are still long time away. So Bitcoin, I am expecting Bitcoin's technological problems not to be a barrier in the near future. And we can debate the concept of near future, whether it's years or a decade. Now, I do believe Bitcoin will be used as both store of value and medium of exchange, but we are probably more than a decade away, maybe even 2 decades, if not more, before Bitcoin has a chance to being a unit of account. That is a completely different barrier that would be very interesting based on, there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. How that will work, hopefully I'll be involved in those discussions. in 10, but I'm not expecting even that discussion for at least 10 years. As far as Bitcoin being adopted for usage as a medium of exchange, I'm expecting that to be like on the scale of email usage, probably within 5 years. At least technologically. Doesn't mean people who use email. My dad didn't start using email till 5 years ago. So just because it's around doesn't mean you have to use it.
So, 6 years ago, I was saying the same thing, and we were seeing adoption in small areas. We were seeing merchant services accepting Bitcoin, and that was exciting. And then all of a sudden, that just went away. There's going to be peaks and valleys when it comes to adoption. So, without getting too far afield, what I would like to say,
we're going to talk about this on a different show.
What I would like to say is I thoroughly enjoyed this academic exercise that may or may not have had any impact on anybody watching. Political views and opinions are not the law. That's important to understand. There is no legal construct to saying whether or not an opinion is right or wrong. There is a legal construct that says that every person, every citizen living in the United States is entitled to free speech and association, which means you can believe in, say, associate with anybody you want for as long as you want, and talk about whatever you want without fear of any retribution or reprisal. So long as you're not advocating for violence against somebody else and that violence is carried out. That's the line that's drawn. That is the law. So whether or not you think that my opinions on Bitcoin are good or bad, doesn't matter. They're my opinions. I'm entitled to them. Just like your opinion to think that I'm wrong, you're entitled to them. And I will defend your ability to have your opinion of me be bad. Even though it's not in my best interest, I will still defend that. And that's fine. But the moment you turn to violence, that's where you lose me. That's where you lose the law. That's where you lose the upper ground. So please, if you're going to go out and you're going to protest, do so without violence. Don't hurt somebody. Don't hurt your neighbor. Don't hurt neighboring businesses. Don't hurt any people. Just try to be a part of a solution, not creating more of a problem. With that, Bill, Tone, stay safe. God bless.
Bill, thank you, Jason. Bill, your closing thoughts, and then we'll
end it. My closing thought, thank you, because there's a lot that we've covered. The first one is that the First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason, because the freedom of speech and association is the one that holds up all the others. If you don't have an ability to speak, what rights do you have? Because the words that really come out of your mouth are what is in your heart and in your mind, and what defines us as a human being more than the ability to express ourselves. And if we can't express ourselves, and if we're canceled because our opinions are wrong or bad or hateful or hurtful, then we lose a portion of our humanity. And that's why throughout this show, the freedom of speech is, whether it's from on corporate platforms or whether it's by the government, is such a fundamental right. And the second is, as Jason was talking about, there's a difference between what the law allows and what it is. But right now we're in a historical moment in the United States where we get to ask the question, not only what the law is, but what should it be? And I think that there's a tremendous movement to say that the law should be different, particularly with respect to police and how police interact with the citizenry. And we need to seize on that. But the mechanism for seizing on that is by showing the moral failings of the oppressors, right? And by engaging with them with violence, we lose the moral high ground. And the moral high ground is how you make social change. And it's been proven throughout the 20th century that those who resort to violence, like the communists in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany, even Hitler thought he was a reformer in some weird fucked up way. Mao did too, and Pol Pot, and all of these people who engaged through their political ends through violence ended up wrecking their societies. But the ones who engaged in Gandhi and Mandela and Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, in their reaction to the systems they were in, they were able to make great change. And we should learn from those examples and use them now to make America a better place. And with that, I'm going to go take care of my clients. And I really appreciate it, Tone. Always a pleasure. And everybody who's listening, be well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bill. Thanks for coming. We're going to wrap this up. There were a couple of other things we didn't get to, maybe on another show. I would love to do one of these again. I'll end on a light note because you focus so much on the First Amendment. I can make an argument that the Second Amendment is more important because if you're holding a gun, you can say whatever you like. You
right.
no longer need the First. But yeah, so other than that, hey guys, I hope you found this show very educational, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll try to bring you more shows like this, along with the continuous promise to start understanding Bitcoin, which will dive more into the tech side of Bitcoin and adoption and other things. All right, Bill, thank you for watching. Thank you for spending all this time. Jason has signed off, and see you on another show. Bye, buddy. All right, guys. Hey, thank you again for watching. I am going to skip the price. Nothing really happened. The S&P pulled back in just in the last few minutes. So not really anything that exciting going on. Thank you for sticking with us. We still have about 420 live viewers. And I will see all of you tomorrow morning or somewhat morning, depending on where you are, probably in the middle of stock market open. And I will see everybody on the next one. Thank you, guys. Look, I know I got a little frustrated when people keep telling me that I don't have enough diversity on this channel. I'm doing my best. And if you think it's easy, you start your own YouTube channel. You will quickly find out how challenging it really, really is. All right, guys. Thank you all for watching, and see you all on the next one.